Welcome to Breaking the News Plus. Big news today. The Attorney General of the state of Minnesota sued a major violence interrupter group. This is a big deal because the violence interrupters have been kind of under the microscope of what do they do? Why are we paying them? Stuff like that. Lou Raguse has been up on this story today. Lou, let's just start with that. We Push for Peace is the violence interrupter group that got sued today. What's a violence interrupter group?
Right. So these really came up after the murder of George Floyd when there was a pushback against police, in particular the Minneapolis Police Department, and a look for ways to supplement policing and curtail violence in ways other than just, arrests and police interactions that could escalate. And so this whole push towards de-escalation, these groups started to crop up with, we live in these neighborhoods. We know a lot of these people, either directly or through their families or reputations, and we can try to de-escalate situations and conflicts to prevent violence, gunfire eventually, and therefore not take the place of police per se, but be where police aren't. Okay. And stop violence before it happens. That's the whole idea behind these. And even though We Push for Peace was actually organized, I just found out today, in 2016, we hadn't heard of it until 2020 when all of these groups started to receive funding. Right.
All the groups started to get sizable amounts of money, and that's kind of what leads us to today. So We Push for Peace, as alleged by the Attorney General today, they were misusing their leadership, two former leaders, misusing $6.5 million of charitable money. So it feels like, what's up? We're paying people a ton of money.
Right.
And they're using it for their own personal gain.
That's what's alleged in the lawsuit. And Trey Hearn Pollard, he goes by Trey Pollard. He's the most visible. You've seen him. If you've seen them on the news, you've seen him. Okay. Like, he's the face of it. And the second person is like the head of the board of directors, and her role was really mostly funneling the money to Trey, according to the lawsuit.
And the money comes from the state or the city?
They had at least $2 million in contracts from the city of Minneapolis. They had contracts from Hennepin County. They had contracts from other government entities as well. But then they also had private contracts from Cub Foods and Whole Foods and other places like that wanted to have them on hand to prevent shoplifting or, kind of like a security presence. And so this includes that because even though that's not like taxpayer money, those are private contracts. We Push for Peace is a charity. It's a nonprofit and therefore falls under the Attorney General's office oversight, and they have to follow certain rules, and they can't misuse money even if they get it from a grocery store.
And this is one of those cases, friends, where when you look at what they allegedly used the money on, you start to get pretty pissed.
Yes.
$6.5 million spent on what? Luxury
Harley
cars,
Davidson,
Vegas, child support payments.
Yeah, the child support one was a big one, and that's kind of twofold. I'll get to that in a second. But first, Harley Davidson, pool and spa, hot tub stores, Las Vegas, checks written to friends and personal acquaintances that have nothing to do with We Push for Peace, and then a personal tax bill to the IRS. When you get to the child support, money was directly paid. Checks were written from We Push for Peace to pay for Trey's child support payments.
That's a red flag.
That's a huge red flag. And it's actually twofold because the lawsuit kind of insinuates that he was fudging his income because that would also play into how much child support he has to pay.
Okay.
So possibly fudging his income on the front end so he has to pay less child support and then paying that child support from the charity itself.
Through the monies given to the nonprofit by separate entities.
Right.
How were you able to ascertain how the AG's office started to figure this out?
They got a complaint. And you mentioned that these have been under the microscope. I mean, there's been people complaining like, hey, what kind of oversight is there at all? Because the city of Minneapolis, for the longest time, really didn't have any oversight on how their money was being spent with the violence interrupter groups, as far as what are the hours that people are putting in and stuff. There's just all the trust was put on the organization. And once they started clamping down on that a little bit, that's when Trey and We Push for Peace kind of backed out a little bit from those government contracts, shied away from them and started going more for the grocery store contracts.
So once the city and or state started asking for receipts, We Push for Peace starts to Homer Simpson into the woods.
Yes.
Okay. So This is not the first lawsuit that we've seen from the Attorney General's office in recent weeks when it comes to nonprofits.
Right. And this is part of the role, so it's not out of the ordinary for these types of lawsuits to be filed by the Attorney General, but just within the last month, 3 pretty high-profile ones. There was the Zion Church in North Minneapolis that received a grant and was accused of misusing that grant money. And that was a big story that came out when I covered the legislative auditor meeting. And it was said that the grant manager left to go be a consultant for the church to, after overseeing the grant, then go and get the grant money by being a consultant.
Right.
She denies that. She denies it. I covered that too. But that's part of a lawsuit where they're trying to recoup like $2.5 million that in state money that was given to the church for this grant. And then just earlier this week, there was another church in North Minneapolis that was accused of misusing about $2 million because churches are nonprofits.
Correct.
Okay, and so they're charities by that definition too. And they were making luxury purchases and all sorts of things. And they also owned a dance studio that that lost its nonprofit. Like they didn't file, but they were still accepting donations as if they were a nonprofit.
So they lost their 501c3 and,
yes.
and they were still acting like they had a license.
Yep, allegedly. And they very much denied it. Raya Kanani did a story and, they sat down, did an interview and really denied everything. So Trey has not gotten back to me yet, so we don't have the other part of the story on that one. But the lawsuit, there's kind of a couple interesting things at the tail end on the We Push for Peace lawsuit. It says that, this is a huge red flag, during Operation Metro Surge, the city of Minneapolis went to We Push for Peace to ask for help because they could use more people in the streets for help with this and that. And the remaining board, they had already cut Trey out of, he didn't have access to the money anymore. The remaining board said that our offices are essentially vacant and we don't have the means to help at all. And what had happened, according to the lawsuit, is that Trey created a competing for-profit company to get those grocery store contracts, steal them right out from under We Push for Peace, so that and he stole the workers, and so his for-profit company has these contracts at the grocery stores and is still making money doing that, but We Push for Peace really is doing nothing.
Wow.
So there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. My question that I want to get to, so if the Attorney General's office is investigating We Push for Peace, this violence interrupter group, one of several that we've seen over the last 6 years, and the city keeps, coming face to face with these groups of, should we extend this contract, should we not? Why doesn't the AG's office tell the city, hey, heads up, we're investigating one of these organizations, so if they come to you asking for money, don't give it to them?
Right. I guess the theory behind why they don't do that is because when you're doing an investigation, if you start telling everyone that there's an investigation, then it's hard to find information. People start to cover stuff up more and stuff like that. And so it's kind of like that's the balance between, like, do we do this investigation so we can catch them for what they're doing wrong, or do we tell everyone about it so that it stops, but then we can't really prove that they did anything before that?
Okay.
And so that's same with federal investigations. That's kind of how that works. City of Minneapolis did tell me that they haven't had a contract with We Push for Peace for a year.
Okay.
But I don't have the exact number, but I was told it was about $2 million or so that they've paid them over the years here.
Wow. Okay, so we have these 2 major lawsuits that come before today with the 2 churches, and they deny the allegations that are made in these legal challenges by the Attorney General. You have the We Push for Peace, the violence interrupter group. That's 3 in just a matter of weeks. So it begs the question, you've covered fraud for years. This is in that same category, but it's in a different sector. Who's next?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one thing to say about this is that, Attorney General Keith Ellison has certain roles for combating fraud, and this is one of them.
Okay.
Making widespread arrests, partly falls under his purview, but is mostly federal investigations, But this is something that his office has direct control over. I think a lot of groups that have seen these last 3 lawsuits being filed are wondering who's next. He personally knew the people involved with the church in the last lawsuit, so he actually recused himself personally and just told his office, follow the investigation where the money leads and do what's appropriate. He has not recused himself from this latest one, so hopefully we'll be able to hear more from him in the coming days and weeks here.
In cases like this, when we're talking about $6.5 million, of course, that pool of money could come from the city, it could the state, it could come from private. But when we're talking to a lot of people watching this who are taxpayers in Minnesota, who are certainly very tired of having their tax dollars go to places that are spending money on Harley Davidsons and luxury cars and going to Vegas, can the city or state get the money back?
In this case, it depends if there's money to get back or not.
Right.
That's always the question. In this case, the way that the lawsuit is written, without getting too far in the weeds, they do believe that there's money to get back. A couple reasons. Because of that for-profit business that I mentioned that Trey created.
The new one.
Yep. And not only that, but he bought that old Merwin's liquor store, and I don't think we've talked about that yet.
I was getting
so
to
that was a huge in the news news story over the course of a year or so. In 2023 is when he finally took it over. But there was so much violence and kind of gang wars and drug dealing going on at this Merwin's liquor store on Broadway Avenue that the city shut it down.
Right.
And then he bought it and it wasn't a unanimous
He bought it
vote.
as an individual
Yes.
or as We Push for Peace?
Nope, as an individual. He bought it. He started his own kind of LLC liquor store company and bought it to operate it. He had to get the liquor license approved by the city, and it wasn't unanimous, but they did approve it. And and then we did these stories, and he talked about how there hasn't been a shooting at that corner, since he took it over, and yada yada stuff like that. Well, according to the lawsuit, he's now accused of using We Push for Peace money to pay his workers at the liquor store. So the liquor store is tied in now to this lawsuit.
Right, and we can't understate when Merwin's Liquors, it is true that there was a lot of problems at Merwin's Liquors on the north side. Residents told us that, neighbors told us that, we had police calls proving that. He comes in to kind of act as the savior of the area and to clean it up. And now we know, at least if the lawsuit is factual, that he's using money that we're giving him as a violence interrupter group to pay the people that work at the liquor store.
Right. And besides the liquor store, he also has a used car lot and was allegedly using the money for that as well. And that was something that his alleged accomplice here was helping funnel that money, according to the lawsuit, to those two businesses. So.
We saw this one come down today. Were you surprised?
I hesitate to say what surprises me and what doesn't surprise me, but I'm naturally a little more cynical about certain things. I think the fact that We Push for Peace was all of a sudden not in the headlines anymore was kind of a red flag, so it did not surprise me to see it come down.
Because we found out why today.
Yes.
Raguse, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure. Thanks for watching Breaking the News Plus. We'll see you next time.